Most people measure the value of their own lives by the number of people still around them. They count how many friends remain after 30, after 40, and when the number dwindles, they panic. They think they did something wrong. They think they drove people away for being too difficult, too cold, too strange. But Carl Jung, sitting in his office in Zurich, observing decades of human souls unraveling and remaking themselves, arrived at a much colder and much more precise conclusion. You didn't lose these people. You lost the character that kept them around. And characters, when they stop being played, cease to have an audience. This is not a tragedy. This is psychic physics. It is the most predictable law of human existence, as inevitable as the fall of an object released in the air. Every relationship built on a performance has an expiration date, and the day you stop performing is the day the relationship begins to die silently, even if no one says out loud what is happening. You must have felt this already. That strange sensation of being surrounded by people at a party, in a message group, at a bar table, and yet feeling a void that shouldn't be there. You smile, you participate, you make the right jokes at the right moments, and yet, on the way home, something in you feels heavy. This is not ingratitude. It is not coldness on your part. It is your unconscious trying to tell you something that your conscious mind still refuses to hear. You were not being you. You were being accepted. And acceptance and love are not the same thing. Acceptance is a contract. Love is a risk. Most human bonds are not born of true connection. They are born of convenience disguised as affinity. You fit into a role, the funny one, the available one, the one who never complains, the one who always understands, the one who carries others on their back without asking for anything in return. And that role guaranteed you a seat at the table. But a seat guaranteed by performance was never really yours. It belonged to the character. And when the character tires, when it collapses from exhaustion, the table collapses along with it. Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear to negotiate with the world. And here is what no one told you about it. The exhaustion you feel after socializing is not physical tiredness. You didn't spend muscular energy in a 2-hour conversation. What drained you was something else, quieter and more cruel. It was the raw effort of keeping an edited version of yourself running all the time, without flaws, without cracks, without letting slip what you actually think. It is the exhaustion of performing comfort so that others never have to feel discomfort around you. And the body knows this before the mind admits it. That is why after certain encounters, you feel like sleeping for 12 hours, even without having made any effort at all. It wasn't conversation. It was acting. Now imagine decades of this. Imagine an entire life built on a succession of small daily acts, each one guaranteeing approval, each one moving you a millimeter away from your real identity. And then, one day, without warning, something inside you simply refuses to go on. You don't consciously decide to stop pleasing. The psychic organism goes on strike. You start to disagree out loud. You start saying no. You start absenting yourself from commitments you previously kept out of social obligation, and it is exactly at this moment that the people around you begin to disappear. They aren't abandoning you. They are leaving because the character they knew died, and they never had any interest in knowing who was behind it. This hurts. I won't pretend otherwise. But the pain here is not a sign of error. It is a sign that something real is finally trying to be born. From a very early age, children learn a lesson that no schoolbook explicitly teaches, but that every social environment reinforces without. Stop. Parts of you are acceptable, and parts of you are not. Anger, when expressed, generates punishment or withdrawal. Ambition, when declared, generates envy or judgment. Sadness, when exposed, bothers the adults around you, who quickly try to distract you from it instead of sitting beside you with it. And so, piece by piece, you learn to edit yourself. You learn to present only the slice of yourself that guarantees emotional safety, and to store the rest in some basement that no one visits. This continuous editing process is what builds the persona. And the persona is neither malice nor weakness. It is social survival. Every child needs it in order not to be rejected by the group that ensures their survival. The problem is not having a mask. The problem is forgetting that it is a mask, and spending your whole life believing that it is, in fact, who you are. Individuation, in Jung's vocabulary, begins exactly at the instant that this confusion cracks. It is the process by which you stop being the sum of others' expectations and begin to become who you were before you learn to edit yourself. And here is the part that no one prepares you to face. Individuation is not a beautiful spiritual event full of light and instant clarity. It begins as a loss. It begins by emptying your social calendar because the people who only knew your mask have no interest whatsoever in the face underneath it. It is not a punishment. It is a natural sorting process. The psychic universe is simply separating those who were there for the character from those who eventually would stay even after it fell. And it is precisely at this point of rupture, when the mask cracks and social interaction begins to cool, that most people panic and try to patch the mask back together any way they can, just to avoid feeling the void that follows. It was by observing this very moment, time and again, in office after office, that I prepared the Código do Despertar for you. It exists because individuation without direction just becomes prolonged confusion, and pain without a map becomes meaningless suffering. Over the course of 60 days, you receive a daily lesson, keys, questions, and declarations built upon the psychology of Carl Jung, not to teach you theory, but to guide you, step by step, through the exact process I am describing right now, leaving the mask, crossing the void, and arriving on the other side whole. You read, perform a micro-action, and record the reflection in your journal. It is not fleeting motivation. It is interior architecture. If some part of you recognize this rupture while listening to this, comment "Eu quero mapa," and you will find the Código do Despertar pinned in the first comment. This is the only gesture of commitment I am asking for right now. After people begin to drift away, a phase arrives that most describe with a single word: emptiness. But emptiness here is inaccurate. It is not absence. It is unprocessed excess. It is the amount of thoughts, memories, and emotions that social routine always kept you from hearing, because you were too busy keeping commitments, answering messages, smiling at dinners. When this external noise ceases, the internal sound finally rises in volume. And for most people, this sound is deafening because they never learned to listen to it. Jung said that what we do not face consciously continues to govern us unconsciously. The silence that remains after superficial relationships dissolve is not a punishment. It is the first time, perhaps in years, that you are alone enough to hear what has always been screaming softly beneath the social noise. And what usually appears first is not peace, it is discomfort. Old memories return without warning. That argument from years ago that you never processed, that disappointment with a parent that you learned to call overcome, but which still dictates, silently, who you choose to love and how you allow yourself to be loved. That fear of abandonment that you have disguised as independence your entire life. All of this rises to the surface when there is no longer enough social noise to drown it out. Most people at this point panic and run back to any available relationship just to silence the quiet. They fill the void with dating apps, with parties they do not want to attend, with empty conversations, with any stimulus that stifles what is rising. But that solves nothing. It only postpones it. It is like putting a bandage on an open fracture. What Jung proposed was radically different. Instead of fleeing from the void, to sit within it, to face it as a territory, not a sentence. Because it is exactly there, in the absence of distractions, that the internal conflicts you have carried for decades finally have space to show themselves. And what shows itself first, almost always, is what Jung called the shadow. The shadow is not hidden evil, as simplified common sense sometimes suggests. The shadow consists of the things you buried inside yourself in order to remain loved. Your swallowed anger in situations where you had every right to take a stand. Your hidden ambition because someone one day called it arrogance. Your boundaries ignored repeatedly because saying no seemed too risky. All of this did not disappear just because you stopped expressing it. Buried things do not die. They leak. They leak as inexplicable resentment in small situations. They leak as disproportionate outbursts for trivial reasons. They leak as a background sadness you cannot name, even when looking from the outside your life seems fine. It is not weakness to feel this. It is the accumulated price of years spent editing who you really are. And here exists a silent danger that most motivational discourses about finding oneself conveniently ignore. Once you begin to recognize your shadow, there is an enormous temptation to transform your newfound solitude into a new mask. A more sophisticated, more intellectual mask, disguised as spiritual superiority. You trade "I need to please everyone" for "I do not need anyone," and feel an intoxicating sense of power in that. But this newly acquired coldness is not freedom. It is just another performance, only now staged for an audience of one, yourself. The pride of not needing friends can be as much of a prison as the old desperate need to please them. Both extremes share the same root, using a social stance as proof of worth, instead of simply living authentically and letting the consequences happen without needing to decorate them with narratives of superiority. Integrating the shadow does not mean being proud of it, nor hiding from it in new clothing. It means acknowledging, with the same clinical coldness with which one observes an objective fact, yes, this is in me, and this is also me. Without drama, without spectacle, without using this discovery as a trophy to post later. It is exactly at this crossroads between truly recognizing the shadow and merely fabricating a new mask of indifference that most people get lost alone, directionless, thinking they are evolving when in fact they are only changing prisons. That is why I prepared the Código do Despertar for you, so that this encounter with the shadow has structure and does not turn into just another cycle of sophisticated self-deception. Comment, "Eu quero o mapa," and the access is waiting for you in the first pinned comment. The decision to continue alone without direction or to go through this with a method is yours, but it needs to be made now, while this clarity is still fresh. There is a difference that most people never learn to see, and it is the exact line that separates those who are evolving from those who are just hiding with a more elegant vocabulary. On one side is isolation out of fear. It is the person who distances themselves from others, not because they have discovered authenticity, but because they have been hurt too much and decided silently that she will never again place herself in a position to be hurt. She calls it selectivity. She calls it not needing anyone. But if you observe with clinical attention, you will realize that behind this posture exists a body in a constant state of alert, not a body at peace. She does not choose to be alone. She is afraid of not being. And fear disguised as choice remains fear. On the other side is conscious solitude. It is something completely different. It is the person who has gone through the process, the dropping of the mask, the uncomfortable silence, the encounter with one's own shadow, and arrived on the other side with a different relationship with themselves. They do not avoid people for fear of suffering. They simply stop accepting any bond just to fill an internal void, because the internal void no longer exists in the same way. They become selective not out of arrogance, but because they finally know what they are looking for, and they also know what they are no longer willing to tolerate. Psychological maturity, according to this logic, does not eliminate the human need for connection. It would be naive to state that, and it would also be dishonest. We are, biologically and psychically, beings made for bonding. The difference does not lie in needing or not needing other people. The difference lies in where this need comes from. Before, it came from a void that urgently needed to be filled by external approval. After individuation, it comes from a full place that desires to share, not one that needs to beg for validation to feel real. You can recognize this in yourself through a simple question, almost brutal in its simplicity. When you are alone, do you feel peace, or do you feel panic disguised as independence? The honest answer to this question tells you exactly which side of the line you are standing on right now. And if the answer is uncomfortable, that is no reason for shame. It is just a datum, a starting point, because no one is born knowing how to distinguish solitude from isolation. It is built, layer by layer, exactly as one deconstructs a mask, slowly and sometimes hurting more than we would like to admit. It is precisely here, in this final distinction between fear disguised as peace and the genuine peace that has been conquered, that most people get stuck alone without any guidance, repeating the same cycle of defensive isolation, thinking they have evolved, when in reality they have only learned a new vocabulary for the same old panic. It was precisely for this final crossing that the Código do Despertar was designed. It is not abstract theory about Jung. It is a practical 60-day sequence that takes you, with daily questions and micro-actions, from the mask to conscious solitude, without leaving you trapped in the middle of the path, disguising fear as maturity. If you recognize that you still do not know for sure which side of this line you are on, this is exactly the sign you were waiting for. Comment "Eu quero o mapa" now and get access in the first pinned comment before continuing. This decision should not wait until the end of the video. The moment to act is now. When someone finally goes through this entire process, the dropping of the mask, the silence that exposed the shadow, the distinction between fear and genuine peace, something interesting happens with the relationships that remained, or with the new ones that begin to emerge. They change in nature completely. The people who remain around you after individuation are not there because you are entertaining them. They are not there because you learned how to be convenient, easy, always available, always in agreement. They are there because, for the first time, they are in contact with who you really are, with your uncomfortable opinions, with your clear boundaries, with your sadness when it exists, without needing to hide it behind an automatic smile. And even so, they stayed. This changes everything. This is no longer social survival. This is real connection. The goal was never to live without friends. That would just be another form of escape disguised as wisdom. The true goal, what Jung spent his life documenting through thousands of patients, is to build bonds that do not require you to sacrifice your own identity as an entrance fee. Relationships where you don't need to perform emotional consistency that you don't feel, enthusiasm that doesn't exist, or infinite availability that drains you from within. Relationships that survive silence, disagreement, and the no spoken at the right time. The true victory in this whole process is not the number of people who stayed. It is not the validation of having rebuilt a social circle. The true victory is quieter, more internal, and therefore more powerful. It is the moment you find peace with yourself, even when you are completely alone in a room, with no notifications on your phone and no social commitment scheduled for that night. When this peace settles in, it changes the type of person you attract. You stop attracting those who need an audience and start attracting those who have a genuine interest in witnessing who you are, unedited. This does not happen by chance, and it does not happen quickly. It happens through repeated choice, day after day, of continuing to choose authenticity even when it costs you company. And that is exactly why most people never get this far, because they give up halfway at the most painful point, thinking the void is permanent, when in reality it is just a transitional phase that few have the courage or the tools to cross until the end. You now know what most will never know. You know that losing friends is not personal bankruptcy, it is triage. You know that the void that follows is not a punishment, it is an invitation. You know that the shadow you carry does not need to be hidden or flaunted, only acknowledged. And you know that on the other side of all this, there is a version of you capable of being alone without panic, and capable of loving without erasing yourself. The question that remains is not intellectual. It is practical, and it is yours, and no one else can answer it for you. Are you going to continue performing an edited version of yourself just to keep chairs occupied around you? Or will you accept the price, sometimes lonely, sometimes uncomfortable, of finally becoming who you are? There is no comfortable middle ground here. Either you keep the mask and the audience it attracts, or you tear it down and discover who is left. The guide for this crossing is pinned in the first comment, called Código do Despertar, waiting for those who are ready to cross for real, not just to watch another video on the subject. The illusion about needing everyone is over now, for those who truly listened. Choose.